A marriage tested. The weight of unwelcome love. At 28 years old, I found myself standing at the crossroads of a marriage that was as beautiful as it was burdened. Nearly 3 years had passed since I'd said I do to my husband, a man just a year older than me, whose love I'd never doubted, but whose family had made me question my place in his world from the very beginning. It wasn't just the subtle glances or the polite but distant conversations. It was the way his family, his twin sisters, both 23, his younger brother of 21, and even his own mother, seemed to carry an unspoken resentment toward me. I'd tried, God knows I'd tried, to bridge the chasm between us. I'd baked cakes for birthdays that went unthanked, sent thoughtful gifts that were acknowledged with little more than a stiff nod, and forced smiles through holidays where I felt like an outsider in my own husband's home. But no matter how hard I reached out, their coldness remained a wall I couldn't scale. My husband had always been my rock, but even he couldn't explain why his family treated me like an intruder. "They're just like that," he'd say with a shrug, as if their behavior was as unchangeable as the weather. But I refused to accept that. I believed in the power of connection, in the idea that love could soften even the hardest hearts. So when my mother-in-law's 50th birthday approached, I saw an opportunity, not just to celebrate her, but to prove to them all that I was worthy of being part of their family. I threw myself into the planning with a determination bordering on obsession. This wasn't just a party, it was my chance to finally break through the ice. My husband warned me, his voice tinged with the weariness of someone who'd long since given up on changing his family. "They might not appreciate it," he said, his eyes flickering with something unreadable, worry, maybe, or resignation. But I was undeterred. I booked her favorite restaurant, the one she and her late husband had frequented, the one where she'd once told me she felt closest to him, even after his passing. I chose the menu based on the dishes she'd mentioned in passing, the ones that made her eyes light up with nostalgia. I selected decorations that mirrored her taste, elegant, understated, the kind of sophistication she prided herself on. And when my husband's siblings showed no interest in helping, I shouldered the burden alone, even covering the costs they refused to share. The day I went to invite her, my stomach was a knot of nerves. My husband and I arrived at her house to find his siblings already there, their faces tightening when they saw us. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle. After a few stilted minutes of small talk, I took a deep breath and revealed the plans for her celebration. My husband, ever the peacemaker, tried to soften the moment by mentioning my efforts, but the second the words left his lips, the atmosphere in the room shifted. His mother's smile froze, her eyes narrowing just slightly, like a predator sensing weakness. I pressed on, detailing the care I'd put into every aspect of the party, hoping, praying that she'd see the love behind my actions. But her response was a blade to the heart, a hollow "thank you," followed by the words that would shatter me. But I think I'd prefer to keep it just family. Just family. As if I wasn't family. As if 3 years of marriage, of sharing a life with her son, meant nothing. The room spun. I could feel the weight of their smirks, the silent triumph in their eyes. My husband's face was a mask of shock, but I was beyond caring. Something inside me snapped. The woman who'd spent months trying to earn their approval was gone, replaced by a fire I hadn't known I possessed. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Go to hell," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "And if you show up tomorrow, I'll have security remove you." The smugness vanished from their faces in an instant. My mother-in-law's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but I was already turning away, my husband trailing behind me in stunned silence. She called after me, her voice trembling with faux outrage. "You're so cold, so cruel." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "No, I'm done." And for the first time in years, I meant it. The aftermath, a party reclaimed. The drive home was a blur of anger and adrenaline. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, my husband sitting beside me in a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. I tried to cancel the reservation, but it was too late. The restaurant had a strict policy, and the deposit was non-refundable. My husband lit a cigarette, the first I'd seen him smoke in months, and exhaled slowly. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. But the right thing didn't make the sting of their rejection hurt any less. Since the money was already spent, I made a decision. If they didn't want the party, then we would take it. I cancelled the last-minute invites to my mother-in-law's friends and replaced them with calls to my own. My husband, after a moment of hesitation, invited some of his closest friends, the ones who'd stood by him long before I came into the picture. We arrived at the restaurant early, stripping away the decorations that had been meant for her. The staff watched us with curious eyes, but I didn't care. This night was ours now, and when our friends arrived, we did more than salvage the evening. We claimed it. There was laughter, there was music, there was a freedom I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since my wedding, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like I belonged. The fallout, a family's true colors. The next morning, I posted the pictures online. It was petty, maybe, but I wanted them to see what they'd missed, what they'd rejected. It didn't take long for the backlash to come. My sister-in-law's text was the first volley. "How could you? That place meant everything to Mom, and you just repurposed it for your own fun. You're selfish. You're heartless." I stared at the screen, my fingers itching to fire back a response. But I didn't. Because for the first time, I realized I didn't owe them anything. Not my time, not my energy, not my guilt. I showed the message to my husband, half expecting him to tell me to apologize, to smooth things over as he always did, but his reaction shocked me. "Don't," he said, his voice firm. "Don't apologize. Don't engage." I blinked. "What?" He turned to me, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. "Cut them off. All of them." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the man who'd spent years supporting his family, who'd bent over backward to keep the peace. "But they're your family," I protested. "They rely on you." "Exactly," he said, his jaw tightening. "And it ends now." The truth unfolds. Years of manipulation. It took days of pressing, of late-night conversations and tearful confessions. But finally, my husband told me everything. When he was 21, his father passed away suddenly, leaving behind a wife who'd never worked a day in her life and 3 children still in school. The inheritance wasn't enough. So my husband, barely more than a boy himself, took on the role of provider. He worked relentlessly, sacrificing his own dreams to keep them afloat. By 23, he'd secured investors for his startup, and for the first time, they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. But instead of gratitude, his family grew entitled. His mother and siblings, who'd once been close, became lazy and materialistic, bleeding him dry with their demands. And when it came to his relationships, they were ruthless. Every girlfriend he'd ever brought home was met with coldness, with veiled threats that she was distracting him from his duties. They'd tried to sabotage us too, whispering poison in his ear during our dating days, urging him to end things. But he'd stood firm. He'd chosen me, and they'd never forgiven him for it. The birthday incident was the final straw. His sister had tried to guilt-trip him. His mother had sobbed on the phone, accusing me of disrespecting her, of driving a wedge between them. But my husband had finally seen the truth. They didn't love him. They loved what he could give them. And he was done. The breaking point, a phone call and a choice. When he called his mother to tell her it was over, her reaction was exactly what we'd expected, explosive. Even with the phone pressed to his ear, I could hear her screams from across the room. She blamed me, of course, accused me of controlling him, of turning him against his family. My husband defended me fiercely, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and grief. "They're adults," he said. "They need to stand on their own." But she wouldn't listen. She resorted to her usual tactics: emotional blackmail, guilt, even invoking his late father's memory. And when my husband's voice broke, when I saw the tears in his eyes, something inside me hardened. I took the phone from him. "Enough," I said, my voice cutting through her tirade. "Your son has made his decision. If you and your children want to remain in our lives, you'll respect us. If not, then you'll be cut off. Completely." And then I hung up. The final stand. A legal battle in freedom. They didn't go quietly. First came the harassment, the missed calls, the vile texts, the attempts to manipulate and guilt trip. I documented everything, blocking them one by one until their voices were silenced. But they weren't done. 2 weeks later, a legal notice arrived. They were accusing my husband of embezzling funds from the family estate to start his business. It was a lie, a desperate attempt to tarnish his reputation and force him back under their control. We fought back. It took time and it took money, but we proved their claims were baseless. The court ruled in our favor, slapping them with a hefty fine for defamation. Their enablers, extended family who'd turned a blind eye to their behavior, finally distanced themselves. And my in-laws? They were left scrambling, forced to find jobs and support themselves for the first time in their lives. Moving forward, a love stronger than blood. This ordeal was brutal. It tested us in ways I never imagined. But it also freed us. My husband and I are finally at peace, building a life unburdened by their toxicity. And as for me, I don't regret a thing. Because some families aren't bound by blood. They're bound by love, and ours is unbreakable.